you, Margaret. And first of all, may I just say, following on from Keith, what an absolute joy it is following Keith, because he's laid out very clearly, in a very, very practical way, some of the challenges that are facing democracies and non-democracies across the world, particularly when a pandemic that has now swept across the world is making us have to work together in ways that we've never had to work together in for a very, very long time. And I do want to start by saying that whilst we may, as a democracy, feel that everybody works to our rules or should work to our rules, unfortunately, there are a lot of inequalities across the globe, and many of them have been self-inflicted upon countries that now stand in the least available space of being able to respond positively to some of the crises that are facing the world today, and the pandemic is included in that. I'm hoping that one of the opportunities that we are going to find as a global nation of democracies, and I mean, we have to call them tyrannies because that's what they are, is to be able to reset some of the balance of how we respond and react and behave with each other in country-to-country relationships. And that has been evident that whilst the pandemic has seen no difference between a rich country or a poor country, a rich person or a poor person, it is inevitable that the poorest of the poor will be hit the hardest. It's inevitable that the opportunities that a handful of people will gauge and get from this pandemic will be particularly and normally from the same sort of countries that normally benefit from crises. And I think what has demonstrated to me over the last few weeks, few months, has been at grassroots level, the ability for people to be able to come together, for the ability for people to be able to share, and for the ability for people to be able to understand that if you have got to overcome something, you have to work closely together to overcome it. What's also been evident, and it's very sad, is that the leaders of the major economies across the world have seen two things. One, that their systems, that however strong they felt they were, have demonstrated how actually poor that they have been in responding to this, and that the poorest of the poor have now stood up and are standing up and saying, we are not going to constantly be on the receiving end of poor services, poor democracy, poor responses in employment. And so I think this is going to be a wake-up call for businesses, for democracy, for parliamentarians across the globe, on how they are going to reset the way things are going to, first of all, happen in their countries, but then how they're going to be able to work in partnership with countries across the world. And that's where important institutions like the Commonwealth, I mean, Keith talked about the interparliamentary activity that happens, but how does it take shape? What takes shape? What does it look like when rich countries sit around a table with poorer countries? Who takes those decisions? Who actually addresses the agenda or sets the agenda? And Margaret very kindly talked about the work I've done around elevating the position of women. Well, where are the women in this debate? How much has the influence of women's position been at the forefront of our response to a pandemic in a pandemic world? And therefore, the question should be, how much have we been involved across institutions prior in the parliamentary world, prior to any major crises? And if we look at any single crisis at any single point in history, it's interesting to see that a majority of the female voice has been absent from the main decision-making and outcomes that have taken place. So I think for all of us who are interested in this subject matter, I think it's really, really important that we see our relationships beyond COVID-19, but we demand, and our expectation should be that we demand from our parliamentarians parliamentarians who are actually true to delivering what they've been elected for or what they have been put in their positions for. And that is very clear. It may not be that they represent absolutely the will of the constituents that they are elected to represent, but at least they should have an understanding that those people that they are being elected on behalf of have a voice that needs to be heard. And we have seen over and over again that once people get into their positions of power, that many of them start then to climb up the ladder of career, and that careerism takes over their actual worth of how they should be questioning the executive, how they should be putting judgment calls in how parliamentarians are working, how governments are working, how leaders are taking decisions, how institutions are responding. And I think if governments are going to play a changed role in how we respond to global issues that we actually are facing today, then we've got to be able to look at how all of us responded to the perils of this global pandemic that many of us will have visualized for the first time in our lives in many, many years. And I think whilst countries themselves have a part to play, within those countries, institutions really do have a very, very big role to play. Institutions have gradually been weakened, where our health systems should have been able to, with all the technology that we hold, been able to respond much more quicker. It obviously has demonstrated that thinking behind what is needed to respond to pandemics has not been well thought through for the longer responses that most countries need. And I've been watching very closely how we've responded and how those countries in poorer nations have responded, and how their economies were crumbling before the pandemic, and how on earth they're going to be able to make ground in recovering post-pandemic. And how are we then, as countries across the globe, going to work together to make sure that economies don't create another recession that we can't all rise up from? So I think it's really, really important. Over the last few days, I've done webinars looking at how we've behaved towards critical frontline workers. And I think it's interesting to see that whilst we're all amazingly thankful and grateful for the work they're doing, and they have done it forevermore, the recognition of the level of work that they deliver to us and risk their lives delivering for our behalf has only been highlighted in recent times. And therefore, will we go back to an old working order where those people then fall slowly back into those gaps of poor pay, not recognition for the skills they use, not recognition for the value they bring? Or are we going to say, no, as a society, as communities, as countries, we demand our governments respond and put into place policies that recognize that every single person that is of value in the value system is recognized for whatever role they play? And I think for far too long, we have all wanted very quick returns and very quick wins. And we have allowed for those quick wins and those quick returns to blur our ability to hold to account those parliamentarians, those leaders, those countries, those governments that have taken decisions that have been absolutely detrimental to many countries around the world. And I think it is time that as we see events unfolding in the United States with the recent events of the black person and the police officer, I think it's really incumbent on us to see these as signals that enough is enough. And unless we are able to work as a collective to what Keith rightly pointed out, democracy, the right of people's the right of people to have access to systems that are there to enhance their lives and not to actually harm them, then I think we are steadily but definitely sliding into a downward spiral where we offer zero moral ground to anyone, and we are not able to demonstrate that as a collective group of nations, we have the ability to have outcomes that are much, much better than what we have now. Now, we may see the harm that has been caused by the pandemic in a negative. I'm hoping that when we all return to a different normality, when we all return to a new norm, the world order itself will also start to address some of those issues. But our characteristics will only be marked by how we hold people to account. How did this pandemic get out of hand? Why was it that we were all so slow in looking at how strong our institutions were? Who was actually taking a scrutinized look at how we're going to make sure that going forward, that all our health systems, whether it is here in the UK, whether it is in a developing nation across the world, we are interlinked. Every single one of us cannot manage without the other person. And therefore, how are we going to make sure that when we are holding people to account, that there is an actual accountability and transparency in that accountability, so that we don't have these mistakes made over and over again. I would leave you with one thought to each and every one of you, because I often think that people feel that, you know, they in themselves as an individual cannot make a difference. And I will say that if we all thought like that, then nothing would change. It sometimes takes individuals to raise their head above the parapet and say, enough is enough. We need to challenge. The press cannot vilify us because we want to challenge. The press cannot constantly be vilified if they want to demonstrate that something that is going on is going on. We have got to be strong enough to be able to challenge where challenge is required, but support where support is required. And I think for far too long, all of us have hidden under the veil of thinking that somebody else needs to take up that mantle. And I say to each and every one who is joined in today, and there are a lot of participants here, that each and every one, even if you take one message out to 2 people you know, we will have a ripple effect. And unless we're prepared to do it, why will anybody else? And I think the problem has been for far too long. Too many rich people have got into power, and too many of the disenfranchised have remained disenfranchised, and too many women have been blocked from coming into that decision-making process at that senior level to make those differences. And I think that it is high time that each and every one of us raises those and puts those questions to leaders wherever they see them. Thank you very much indeed.